Imagine this. You're drifting through space, looking down at Earth, but not the blue planet you know. Below you, vast glaciers swallow continents, the seas have pulled back for hundreds of miles, and in the dry, cutting wind, giant creatures move slowly. Mammoths, woolly rhinos, cave lions, and humans, small but stubborn, keeping their fires alive through the planet's longest winter. This isn't a story from another world. It is our world, only tens of thousands of years ago. An age when time moved so slowly that no one living through it could sense the change. The ice didn't just freeze oceans and mountains, it froze memory itself, the memory of Earth, waiting in silence for us, the curious ones, to return and listen. Time, I wonder, where are you listening from, and what hour is it where you are? Strange, isn't it? We're speaking of ancient ages, yet sharing this small, fleeting moment together. If you find a quiet comfort in this slow rhythm of storytelling, I'd be deeply grateful if you stayed. Maybe leave a like or subscribe. Not for numbers, but so this small wandering signal, this whisper from the Ice Age, might reach another curious soul, somewhere out there, suspended between space and time. If the Ice Age were a chapter in Earth's endless autobiography, then this, the breath of the Earth, would be its heartbeat. Not loud or dramatic, but steady, patient, and powerful enough to shape every continent, ocean, and living thing that has ever walked its surface. When we look up at the sky, the sun seems eternal and unchanging. Yet for Earth, that light has never been constant. The amount of solar energy the planet receives rises and falls in cycles so vast that no human lifetime can perceive them, not over a century, not even over a civilization. These long rhythms are the planet's breath. Slow, almost inaudible, yet strong enough to send ice sweeping down from the poles, then call it back again, like the tide of time itself. The first people to glimpse this truth were not prophets, but patient observers, astronomers and geologists. In the early 20th century, a Serbian scientist named Milutin Milankovic revealed what we now call the Milankovic cycles, a cosmic symphony composed of the Earth's orbit, tilt, and wobble. Earth, he discovered, does not travel around the sun in a perfect circle, but in an ellipse that slowly changes shape. Sometimes our world drifts closer, soaking in more sunlight. Sometimes it wanders farther away, and the light must travel millions of extra miles to reach it. But orbit alone doesn't tell the whole story. The tilt of Earth's axis, currently about 23.5 degrees, also shifts over a cycle of roughly 41,000 years. When the tilt increases, summers at the poles grow warmer, the ice retreats, and the seas rise. When it decreases, summers cool, the snow lingers, and each winter's snowfall piles upon the last until the weight of centuries forges new glaciers. And then there is the precession, Earth's gentle wobble, like a spinning top slowing down. Every 26,000 years, the planet's axis points toward a new place in the heavens, shifting the alignment of the seasons. Just a small change in angle, a slight variation in distance, can plunge the world into an ice age or lead it out again. From a distance, you could see Earth as a colossal celestial clock, each gear a different motion of its orbit, turning at its own pace but meshing perfectly in the machinery of the cosmos. No sound, no visible movement, yet across geological time you can trace its rhythm, the slow inhale and exhale of climate, of water, of ice. Imagine a summer 40,000 years ago. The sun still rises and sets as it does today, but the tilt of Earth's axis weakens its warmth. Snow falls in winter, and when summer comes, it doesn't quite melt. The next year, more snow piles on top, and then more still. Over centuries, those layers compress into ice. That's how an ice age begins, not with an explosion or cataclysm, but with the quiet persistence of snow that refuses to leave. This cycle is not a catastrophe, it's a breath. Earth inhales when ice grows and reflects sunlight back into space, cooling itself further. It exhales when glaciers melt, oceans absorb the warmth, and life blooms again. Each breath lasts tens of thousands of years, too slow for any living thing to feel, but long enough to transform the planet. Humans of that era, small bands scattered along the icy plains, had no idea they were living through one of Earth's deep inhalations. They only felt longer winters, shrinking forests, and the steady migration of the herds they followed. For them, this was not change, it was simply life. Yet from the perspective of time itself, they were walking through the heartbeat of a planet. Milankovic once said, Earth does not merely orbit the sun, it dances. And that dance, though slow, choreographs the history of life. Every time the ice advanced, the seas retreated, and land bridges rose. Humans and animals crossed continents. When the ice melted, the oceans returned, reshaping coastlines and forcing migrations anew. Every civilization, every myth of the Great Flood, from Sumer to India to the Maya, is an echo of that cosmic breath. Pause for a moment and think about that. When we say Earth is alive, it isn't just poetic. It's literal. It has rhythms, cycles, feedback loops. When temperatures rise, oceans release carbon dioxide, trapping heat and melting more ice. When the world cools, the oceans absorb that gas again, locking away warmth and rebuilding the cold. It is self-regulating, not according to human will, but to an ancient harmony older than memory. If you stand today in a glacial valley in Scandinavia or Canada and run your hand along a rock scored by ice, you are touching the residue of that breath. Every groove is a moment of inhalation. Every lake filling a valley is an exhalation. The beauty of science lies not only in numbers, but in its ability to reveal the rhythm of a living world. And here lies the paradox. In the apparent stillness of climate, nothing is truly still. What we call stability is merely the pause between two long, slow breaths. When humanity appeared, Earth was at the end of one great inhale, the ice receding, warmth returning. Forests grew, rivers ran freely, and within that gentler rhythm, we learned to plant, to build, to write. Civilization itself was born in the calm between breaths. That truth is both humbling and haunting. To the earth, we are but a single heartbeat in an age-long cycle, and yet we are aware of it. From tree rings, from bubbles trapped in ancient ice, we have begun to hear the pulse of our own planet. In a way, science and ancient faith share the same longing, to listen, to understand the invisible rhythm that moves all things. Look at a graph of global temperature spanning hundreds of thousands of years. It rises and falls like the slow breathing of a sleeping giant. In that moment, you realize you're not merely studying history. You're listening to the pulse of home. And so every story of the Ice Age, every glacier, every extinct giant, every human fire burning against the cold, is part of the same symphony. A symphony Earth has been performing for 4 billion years. We've only just learned to hear a few of its notes. That is the breath of the earth, slow, deep, and endlessly patient. It teaches us humility. It invites us to listen, and it reminds us that everything we call weather, season, or change is simply another breath of a living world. If you listen closely, in the wind, in the waves, you can still hear it. The whisper of time, of stone, and of the home that holds us all. Imagine standing at the edge of the world, not before a sea, nor a mountain range, but before a wall of ice. It towers so high you must tilt your head back just to glimpse its summit, where pale sunlight fractures across the surface, scattering into 1,000 shards of blue. The ice glows faintly from within, as if holding the breath of time itself inside its frozen heart. Beneath your feet, the earth is silent. Only the wind moves, brushing snow against snow, the quiet sound of a planet asleep. But if you listen more closely, you'll realize this world is not dead. In the dim twilight, you hear a soft rustle, a white-furred stoat dashing across the snow, leaving tiny prints that vanish behind it. Far off, a herd of muskoxen shifts and exhales clouds of mist into the brittle air. And somewhere below the slope, a trickle of meltwater begins to flow, slow, steady, and warm against the cold, proof that beneath this colossal frozen mantle, the earth is still alive, still breathing. That wall of ice is not just a spectacle. It is the boundary between two worlds. On one side, the cold wind and the lifeless glare of white. On the other, forests and plains clinging to survival at the edge of the cold. The great ice sheets of Laurentide in North America and Fennoscandia in Europe once covered millions of square kilometers. Thick as mountains, heavy enough to press the crust of the earth downward. They were not merely ice, they were machines of time, slowly grinding across continents, carrying stone, soil, and the memories of lost ages. If you could stand there for centuries, you would see the ice move, not fast but patient. It creeps forward slower than the beating heart of a stone, yet it never stops. Each meter that advances is a story, ice cracking, collapsing, being born again. Within its depths lie the layers of history, Every flake of snow, every winter, every ancient breath trapped in silence and blue light. And perhaps once, humans stood before this wall as we might stand before a god, powerless to cross it, unable to fight it, living only along its edges. For at those edges life persisted, where snow met grass, where cold met wind, where fragile creatures found a way to endure. It was there, at this ecological frontier, that nature divided itself. On one side stretched the ice desert, so bright it hurt to look at, on the other the green border, where scattered grasslands drew herds of grazing beasts and offered a narrow chance for humans to survive. Here, at the meeting of two extremes, life flourished, because boundaries, no matter how harsh, are where adaptation and hope are born. If you've ever flown over the Arctic or Antarctic, those streaks of ghostly blue you see below are the descendants of those ancient sheets. They are still there, breathing slowly, melting slowly. And each time a piece of ice breaks and falls into the sea, it's another heartbeat of the earth echoing in silence. In this world, where ice touches sky and wind touches skin, you feel as though you've stepped outside of time. Everything slows, every sound grows distant, and perhaps in that stillness you begin to understand. Silence does not mean death. It is only the pause between movements in a symphony still being played. And if you're still awake, still listening to the end of this frozen journey, leave me a little sign below. Type 1 if you're still here, standing before the wall of ice with me, or type 0 if you've drifted off, carried away by the wind of this ancient winter. Either way, thank you, because somewhere out there, in the long night of time, you're still listening to the earth breathe. The world beneath the wall of ice was not static. It shifted, stretched, and reshaped itself in silence. After all, every breath of the earth leaves its mark. And when the planet inhaled deeply enough to lock away oceans within the glaciers, the shape of the continents changed. As the ice sheets thickened, trillions of tons of water were drawn out of the seas and imprisoned in frozen form. The oceans fell, not by inches, but by more than 100 meters. What had been shallow coastlines turned into plains of mud and wind. Bays became valleys. Islands became mountains in a dry, frozen expanse. And from the heart of this transformation, new worlds emerged. Continents that existed only for a fleeting geological moment, revealed by the breath of the cold. If you could have flown above the planet then, the earth would have looked wider. The blue of the oceans had retreated, and between them appeared bridges of land, great corridors of life connecting places that today are separated by sea. To the north, Beringia stretched between Asia and North America. A vast plain of tundra and steppe, more than 1,000 kilometers wide. It was not just a narrow strip of earth, but an entire ecosystem, threaded with rivers, dotted with low hills, swept by the cry of the wind. Herds of mammoths and bison roamed across it, their paths carving faint trails through the snow-dusted grass. Wolves followed close behind, and scattered among them, small groups of humans, wrapped in furs, faces hardened by the wind, made their way eastward, chasing the herds toward a new world that no one yet knew existed. Farther south, another land rose from the water, the Sunda Shelf, which once connected the islands of Indonesia to the mainland of Southeast Asia. What we now call Java, Borneo, and Sumatra were not islands then, but the rolling hills of a single, sprawling continent. Dense forests filled the valleys. Elephants, rhinos, and early humans wandered freely between lands that today are separated by sea. It was a humid counterpoint to the frozen north, proof that even in the coldest times, life found many ways to move forward. Across Europe, the Doggerland Plain stretched where the North Sea lies today, joining Britain to the continent. Rivers wound lazily through grasslands. Red deer and aurochs grazed on the open fields, and along the shores people built their camps, fished the rivers, and followed the rhythm of the seasons. When the ice finally melted and the seas returned, their world would vanish beneath the waves, a memory preserved in peat and silt, in the bones of fish caught where no sea should have been. These bridges, Beringia, Sunda, Doggerland, were not merely geological accidents. They were arteries of life, opened by the chill of the Ice Age. Through them, animals migrated to new continents, spreading species and stories alike. Through them, humans crossed thresholds that would shape the destiny of our kind. The planet, it seemed, was folding in on itself, letting its scattered lands briefly touch before drifting apart again. Each bridge that rose out of the sea was both a path and a promise, a reminder that every change in the Earth's breath carries opportunity as well as loss. Imagine standing there on one of those plains. The air is sharp and dry, the grass brittle beneath your feet. The wind howls, carrying fine dust and the smell of snow from a continent away. Before you, a herd of mammoths stretches to the horizon, massive silhouettes moving in solemn rhythm. Behind them follow reindeer, horses, and wolves, all bound by the same ancient instinct: to move, to follow, to survive. Alongside them, humans walked too. They didn't know they were crossing from one world to another. They only knew that the land continued, and so they followed it. Step by step, through cold and hunger, through snowstorms that erased the sky. The footprints they left behind were soon covered by frost, but in time, those paths became the routes by which our species spread across the globe. When you look at a map today, it is easy to think the continents have always been what they are: fixed, familiar, final. But during the Ice Age, the world was fluid. The lines we now draw between land and sea were shifting boundaries in a living landscape. Every retreat of the ocean was a revelation, every return of the tide an erasure. And when the world finally began to warm again, the bridges disappeared as quietly as they had come. The sea reclaimed what the cold had borrowed. Beringia sank beneath the waves of the Bering Strait. The Sunda Plains were swallowed by the rising waters of the Java Sea. Doggerland vanished beneath the North Sea, leaving behind only a few fragments of peat and bone, whispers of a time when Europe and Britain were one. But for a while, a brief, shimmering moment in the long story of the Earth, the continents touched, and in that moment, life moved. Across the wind-swept highways of ice and grass, the world redrew itself. Not on maps, but in the footsteps of those who dared to follow where the land once rose to meet the sky. From the stillness of the wall of ice to the opening of vast, forgotten continents, the planet was in motion, quietly reshaping itself under the slow pulse of cold and light. And as the wind swept across these exposed plains, they carried more than snow and dust. They carried the scent of change, the promise that even in an age ruled by ice, the Earth was already dreaming of what would come next. The land that rose beneath the retreating seas did not remain untouched for long. For while oceans withdrew, the glaciers continued their slow and patient march, carving everything in their path. What the sea had revealed, the ice began to sculpt, grinding mountains, deepening valleys, reshaping the very bones of the continents. If you could have stood above the Earth then, looking down from the cold silence of space, you would have seen two great white mantles spreading outward from the poles: the Laurentide ice sheet in North America and the Fennoscandian ice sheet across northern Europe. Each one was a continent of ice unto itself, thousands of meters thick, stretching from horizon to horizon, gleaming with the faint blue of compressed centuries. Beneath their weight, the crust of the Earth bent downward, sinking under a burden so immense that even now, 10,000 years later, the land is still slowly rising back toward the sky. These glaciers were not still monoliths. They moved. They flowed like rivers, rivers made of time. Their pace was glacial in every sense, a few centimeters each day, sometimes less, but unstoppable. They scraped across bedrock with the persistence of eternity, grinding everything beneath them into fine, silvery dust. Mountains were split and shaved to sharp peaks. Valleys were hollowed into wide, U-shaped troughs. Rivers were rerouted, forced into new paths by the frozen giants above. As the ice advanced, it carried with it stones and boulders the size of houses, plucked from one land and dropped hundreds of miles away. Even now, these glacial erratics still stand scattered across fields and hillsides, silent witnesses to their long journey. Every scar in the rock, every smooth valley floor, every hidden lake is a signature of that ancient craftsmanship, the handwriting of ice. And when the ice finally paused, when the warmth of 1,000 summers began to nibble at its edges, it did not simply melt. It wept into the land. Streams of meltwater burst from beneath the glaciers, carving deep channels through the rock. In some places, the water pooled into immense lakes held back by walls of ice. When those walls gave way, they unleashed torrents so vast they redrew entire landscapes in days. The great Missoula floods of North America tore through the land again and again, carving the Columbia River gorge, cliffs and canyons born not of centuries, but of moments. Across Europe, similar tempests erupted, vast floods of meltwater rushing from the Fennoscandian ice cutting new paths for rivers that still flow today, the Thames, the Rhine, the Danube. Each was a creation of chaos, sculpted by water, set free from its icy prison. Yet for all its violence, this process was also an act of renewal. The glaciers stripped the land bare, but in doing so, they made it fertile. Beneath the crushing weight of the ice, rocks were ground into fine mineral dust, the raw material of soil. When the ice retreated, it left behind a world cleansed and ready. Rivers filled the scars it had carved, lakes shimmered in the valleys, plants rooted in the fresh earth, drawing life from what had once been destruction. Imagine walking across that newborn land. The air is clean in a way that no modern air can ever be. The ground beneath your feet is soft, newly formed, untouched by footsteps. Around you, small streams wind through fields of stone, and in the distance the last glaciers glint under a pale sun. The silence is immense. The world is young again. Even the continents themselves carry the memory of that rebirth. The Great Lakes of North America, vast inland seas holding a fifth of the planet's fresh water, are the fingerprints of the Laurentide ice sheet pressed deep into the land. The fjords of Norway, the lochs of Scotland, the thousand lakes of Finland, all were carved by ice, shaped by its unhurried patience. Wherever you find a deep valley with smooth walls or a plain scattered with strange boulders, you are walking on the traces of its passage. And yet, this carving was not only physical. It was emotional, in the sense that it reshaped the way life would move and think. Animals learned the paths between valleys, rivers became highways of migration. And humans, following the meltwater and the green shoots that followed, began to map their future across this transformed earth. The glaciers, in their cold and wordless way, became architects of civilization. They determined where rivers would run, where soil would be rich, where valleys would cradle the first settlements. Every fertile plain, every winding river delta that now supports millions of lives was once the shadow of an ancient glacier. The age of ice, for all its silence, was not a time of death. It was a sculptor's age, a long, patient shaping of the planet's surface and soul. The glaciers carved not only the land, but the possibilities of what the land could become. As the ice slowly withdrew, it left behind more than lakes and valleys. It left stories, written in stone, whispered in the wind, carried by rivers that still trace the same paths carved in that frozen dawn. And so the world that emerged from beneath the glaciers was not a ruin, but a beginning. From the bridges of Beringia and Sunda to the deep valleys and glittering lakes they left behind, the planet was being remade, a living canvas of water, rock, and time. And in the stillness that followed, the wind began to rise once more, carrying with it dust from the exposed plains. The next great chapter of the Ice Age, written in air and silence. When the glaciers paused and the world caught its breath, the air itself began to change. The ice had carved the bones of the continents, but now it was the wind's turn to shape their skin. The same cold that froze the seas and ground the mountains also gave birth to an atmosphere unlike any the planet had known. Thin, restless, and heavy with dust. From the edges of the retreating glaciers, vast plains of bare earth stretched out, scraped clean of soil and vegetation. The ground was dry, the color of ash, and every gust of wind lifted it grain by grain into the sky. Across continents, the air thickened with fine particles of rock, ground to powder beneath the glacier's weight, then freed when the ice withdrew. These were not small storms. They were veils drawn across the world. The lowest winds, as scientists now call them, carried dust for thousands of kilometers, layering the land in blankets of pale earth that still lie beneath our feet today. In China, in Europe, in the heartlands of North America. In some places, these layers grew hundreds of feet deep, building silently through centuries of wind. To live beneath such a sky would have been to see the world in muted tones. The sun burned weakly through a haze that never quite cleared. The horizon blurred, days were dim and dry, nights were sharp with frost. The wind never truly rested. It swept the plains, carving ripples in the dust like waves on an inland sea. And yet, even in this desolation, life persisted. It bent, but it did not break. The mammoth steppe, that endless stretch of grass and wind, drew its strength from this very dust. Carried on the breath of the world, the mineral-rich particles settled into the soil, feeding the hardy grasses that kept entire ecosystems alive. In a strange and delicate balance, the same winds that stripped the earth bare also nourished it anew. But for those who lived through it, human and animal alike, the winds were merciless. Imagine walking across one of these plains, the sky the color of bone, the air filled with grit that stings the eyes and teeth. The sound of the wind is constant, a low moan that seems to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. The landscape is open, vast beyond comprehension. No trees, no shelter, only distance. Across that barren expanse, herds of animals moved like rivers of fur and muscle. Mammoths, bison, and horses trod the same worn paths, following the scent of sparse grass. Their breath rose in clouds that the wind immediately tore apart. Wolves and cave lions shadowed them, pacing the horizon, lean silhouettes against the pale sky. And among them, humans followed. Small figures wrapped in hides, walking slowly against the gusts, heads bowed. They had no maps, only memory and instinct. The wind erased their footprints almost as soon as they were made, but still they walked, because the world, for all its hostility, still offered a path forward. To those early travelers, the air itself must have seemed alive, a force with moods and tempers. Sometimes it was a soft breeze that carried the smell of thawing earth. Sometimes it was a storm that blotted out the sun and buried camps in waves of drifting dust. And in its rhythm, relentless, untamed, they might have heard the echo of the glaciers themselves, a whisper of the ancient power that still ruled the horizon. There were nights, perhaps, when the wind fell silent for a moment. The sky cleared, and above the frozen plains the stars burned with impossible clarity. The world felt still, but it was not truly quiet. The dust still moved, settling softly across sleeping camps, over the backs of resting animals, over the bones of those who had come before. Every breath drawn in that age carried a trace of the earth's grinding heart. The climate, too, responded to this dance of dust and wind. The fine particles drifting through the atmosphere scattered sunlight back into space, keeping the world colder still. In some regions, snowfall diminished, and paradoxically, the coldest parts of the Ice Age were deserts. Vast frozen plains where precipitation was too rare to build new ice. The poles were dry as bone, the air crisp but barren. And yet, from that apparent lifelessness, a strange kind of fertility emerged. When the winds finally weakened and the world warmed, the dust settled into deep, rich soils. Those same lowest deposits would one day nourish the great farmlands of Europe, China, and the American Midwest. The legacy of the Ice Age winds still feeds humanity today. But in their own time, those winds were not gentle benefactors. They were voices of the ice, carrying its message across continents. The glaciers had spoken through stone, now they spoke through air. Every grain of dust was a word, every storm a reminder that the world, even in its stillness, was always in motion. If you could have stood there, on one of those endless plains, your face turned toward the wind, you would have felt the pulse of the planet in every gust. The cold biting your skin, the dust stinging your eyes, the horizon fading into white, and beneath it all, a deep, slow rhythm, the sound of the earth exhaling. The wind would not stop. It swept over the plains, across the herds, over the small fires of humankind, carrying with it the story of the ice. And beyond that wind, where the land met the sky, a new world waited. The vast grasslands of the mammoth steppe, the beating heart of the Ice Age. The wind carried more than dust, it carried life. Beyond the glaciers, where the cold bit deep but the land lay open to the sun, stretched a world unlike any that exists today. It was neither desert nor tundra, neither forest nor plain, but something in between. A boundless wilderness of pale light, an endless movement. The scientists who came long after would call it the mammoth steppe. Imagine standing there. The horizon is a vast, trembling line, the air sharp enough to sting the skin, the ground firm beneath a thin crust of snow. All around you, the grass shivers like fur in the wind. It is not lush or green, but coarse, golden, resilient, nourished by the mineral dust that the glaciers cast across the continents. This was the beating heart of the Ice Age world, a land that stretched from Western Europe to Siberia and across the now vanished Beringian Plain into North America. Here, in this frozen sea of grass, life thrived in impossible abundance. Herds of mammoths moved in solemn processions, their shaggy coats swaying, their curved tusks slicing through the pale air as they dug beneath the snow for the sweet stems of grass below. Bison followed in vast rumbling waves, dark shapes rolling across the horizon like living thunder. Reindeer and wild horses galloped in herds so large that from a distance they seemed to blur into a single moving shadow. And among them wandered the giants, the woolly rhinoceroses, their horns caked with frost as they scraped through the snow, the musk oxen, low and defiant, standing shoulder to shoulder when the wolves came. Each creature had found its place in the rhythm of this frozen Eden, shaped by cold, bound together by the pulse of survival. The predators were never far behind. On the ridges, the dire wolves trotted in lines, their breath steaming, their eyes fixed on the herds below. Cave lions stalked the open plains, nearly twice the size of the lions we know today, golden phantoms moving with lethal grace. And waiting in ambush among the low shrubs were the saber-toothed cats, their fangs gleaming ivory white, curved like the crescent moon that hung above the snow. It was a world in motion, a great migration without end. Every creature, from the smallest vole burrowing beneath the frost to the towering mammoth that could crush a tree beneath its step, was bound by the same law: to move or to perish. The ice advanced and retreated, the seasons swung between frozen hunger and brief abundance. When the wind blew warm from the south, the grasses burst to life and the plains rang with the sounds of hooves and calls. When winter returned, silence fell, but even then, life endured, buried beneath the snow, waiting. To walk across the mammoth steppe was to feel the planet breathing. The rhythm of migration was the rhythm of the earth itself. Slow, constant, circular. The herds fed the predators thinned the herds, and their bones fed the soil that nourished the grass again. It was a cycle that had no beginning and no end, a balance born from hardship. And within this balance, humans appeared, latecomers to a land already ancient. They followed the herds, not as conquerors, but as students of the cold. Wrapped in furs, faces hidden against the wind, they watched and learned. Where the mammoths dug for food, where the rivers froze last, where the predators lingered. To survive here, knowledge was as vital as fire. A misplaced step could mean death. A single well-aimed spear could mean life for an entire family. Yet in this harsh land, humans were not strangers. They were part of it. Their fires flickered in the same rhythm as the stars above. Their breath joined the clouds of beasts around them, and their footprints mingled with the tracks of wolves and mammoths in the snow. For the first time, humanity stood not outside of nature, but within it. One heartbeat among many in the great pulse of the Ice Age. Still, it is impossible to overstate the beauty of this world. It was a landscape of silence and grandeur, stripped of excess, alive with raw, essential forms. The wind sang low across the plains. The sun cast long shadows that glowed amber through the frost. When a herd of mammoths passed, the ground trembled like a drum. When they rested, the air was filled with their deep, rumbling voices, a sound that seemed to rise from the earth itself. But beneath that beauty was always fragility. The mammoth steppe existed only because the balance of cold and light was perfect. Too much warmth, and the grasslands would vanish beneath forests. Too much cold, and snow would bury the food that sustained them. Life here lived on the knife's edge between plenty and famine. Every breath of wind could tip the scales. And yet, for tens of thousands of years, this world endured. It stretched across half the planet, uniting continents that today are oceans apart. It fed the great herds, taught humans the art of adaptation, and shaped the stories that would echo down through time. Even now, in the frozen tundra of Siberia and Alaska, its ghosts remain. Deep beneath the permafrost lie the bodies of mammoths, perfectly preserved, their fur still golden, their eyes closed as if sleeping. In their stomachs, scientists have found the grasses they ate on their final day, blades still green after 40,000 years. When those remains are uncovered, it feels as if the wind of that long-lost world still lingers, carrying the scent of dust, grass, and ancient breath. To stand on that plain, if one could, would be to witness the earth at its most honest, vast, unforgiving, and yet full of life. It was a world without comfort, but rich in meaning, where survival was its own kind of grace. And beyond the herds and the wind, at the edges of the firelight, another story was beginning to unfold. The story of the humans who learned to live, to hunt, and to dream in the shadow of the ice. From the heart of the mammoth steppe, they would carry its lessons into the ages to come, and in their hands, the spark of humanity would begin to burn brighter than ever before. The mammoth steppe was not just a land of grass and wind, it was a stage for giants. To live then was to share the earth with creatures so vast, so improbable, that even imagination bends beneath their weight. The age we call the Ice Age could just as easily be named the Age of Giants. For never before, and never again, would this planet hold so much life on such a monumental scale. Look again across those frozen plains. The herds that move beyond the horizon are immense, but among them, certain forms rise even higher, shapes carved from the breath of the world itself. They are the megafauna, the great mammals of the Pleistocene, molded by cold, by endurance, by the strange generosity of scarcity. If you were to walk among them, the first you'd meet would be the woolly mammoth, the undisputed monarch of the steppe. Standing over 3 meters tall at the shoulder, tusks curling forward like ivory crescents, glinting beneath the pale sun. Its long coat ripples in the wind, rough on the outside, soft beneath, trapping warmth as the cold gnaws at the air. Even its blood had changed, a quiet miracle of evolution, carrying oxygen through its body even when the air froze solid. Each step it took left a crater in the snow big enough to cradle a child, and yet, for all its size, the mammoth moved with grace, a slow, deliberate rhythm, as though it remembered every age that came before. Beside it walked its cousin, the mastodon, shorter, broader, with straighter tusks and teeth made for crushing bark and pine. They haunted the glacial forests where frost silvered every branch. When they moved, the earth shuddered. And when they called to one another, the sound rolled through the valleys like thunder, softened by distance. Farther south, in lands less bound by cold, other titans wandered. The ground sloths of the Americas, lumbering and vast, stood taller than a man even on all fours. When they reared up to feed, they towered 6 meters high. Their claws, curved and heavy as sickles, tore whole branches down from the trees. Gentle giants, but unstoppable when threatened. Then came the woolly rhinoceroses, wide-shouldered and shaggy, twin horns sweeping forward like natural spears. They roamed the Eurasian plains, scraping the snow away with patient strength, their hides so thick that even wolves and lions hesitated to strike. In their eyes, small, dark, and deep, burned the calm of creatures who had survived 100,000 winters. But for every herbivore, there was a shadow. For every herd, a hunter. The saber-toothed cat. Smilodon ruled the valleys, its fangs curved like polished knives of bone, long enough to pierce the neck of a mammoth calf in one perfect strike. Built not for speed but for strength, it waited in silence, then leapt with terrible precision. Nearby roamed the cave lions, larger than any lion alive today. They hunted in groups, sleek ghosts of gold and frost, and where they prowled, the air held a quiet tension, the stillness before the kill. Following all of them came the dire wolves, heavier, broader, their jaws strong enough to shatter bone. They followed the herds for miles, patient, tireless, their howls rolling across the plains like a memory of sorrow. Elsewhere, the world grew stranger still. In South America, glyptodonts, armored armadillos the size of cars, trudged across the dust. In Australia, giant kangaroos bounded through dry forests while marsupial lions hunted with crushing jaws. Flightless birds, taller than men, stalked the open ground, their feathers black against the pale sun. Even the rivers carried monsters, crocodiles longer than boats, jaws like ancient gates. Everywhere size had become salvation. In the cold, mass meant warmth. In the plains, bulk meant power. Even the air seemed thicker, slower, as if the planet itself had matched its pulse to that of these colossal beings. To walk among them was to feel small, truly small, not only in body but in soul. The ground trembled beneath their herds. The sky itself seemed to hold its breath. Every sound, every heartbeat echoed longer, deeper, older. And yet, for all their grandeur, the balance was fragile. This world of giants was sustained by cold and grass, by the thin line between frost and thaw. Too much warmth and the forests would smother the plains. Too much cold and the snow would bury the food beneath it. They lived balanced upon a knife's edge, and they knew it. Among them walked humans, small, but observant. Late arrivals to this great performance, they followed the herds, studying their movements, learning the routes and the seasons. When the mammoths migrated, humans followed. When the predators hunted, humans watched from afar, waiting for what was left behind. Fire was their only defense against the night, fur their only shield. And yet, they endured. At night, the plains glowed with embers. Small circles of fire flickered beneath the stars, each one a fragile defiance of the cold. Around them, the giants moved through the dark, their breath rising like smoke, their shadows crossing the horizon. In that mingling of firelight and frost, humans and beasts shared the same silence, the same endless winter. There was a strange beauty in that coexistence. When the herds moved, people moved with them. When the predators hunted, humans scavenged. Everything, every motion, every heartbeat was part of one immense rhythm, the rhythm of a living earth. The giants shaped the land even as they lived upon it. Their hooves churned the soil, spreading seeds. Their dung fed the grass. Their deaths fed the scavengers. Their bones became shelters. Their tusks, tools. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was separate. To see this age through the eyes of science is to see cycles, carbon, dust, ice, decay. But to feel it, to imagine it, is to understand that this was not a frozen wasteland. It was a living, breathing symphony, a harmony of hunger and endurance, of motion and stillness, of cold and light. Even now, echoes remain. In the Arctic tundra, musk oxen still stand in defensive rings when wolves appear. In the plains of North America, bison still move as their ancestors once did, heads bowed against the wind. And beneath the permafrost of Siberia, mammoths still lie sleeping, their hair golden, their bellies full of grass. The world that shaped them may be gone, but the memory of it still lingers in the soil, in our stories, perhaps even in our genes. For humankind, that time was a lesson written in ice. To live small beneath great things, to endure not by conquering, but by listening, by learning to move with the rhythm of the earth instead of against it. But change was coming, quietly, invisibly. The air was beginning to soften. The glaciers, though vast, had begun to sigh, melting at their edges. Rivers deepened, the seasons grew uncertain, and far to the south the green began to return. The giants who had ruled for so long would not survive what was coming. But for humans, it would be the dawn of something new. And so, the age of giants began to fade. The ice had sculpted the land, the wind had seeded it, and the great beasts had walked it. Now, their footsteps would become our inheritance. And the story of humankind, the firekeepers of the steppe, was about to begin. Night falls across the steppe, the last light fades from the rim of the horizon, and the cold begins to move. It slithers between the tall, dry grasses, settles in the cracks of the earth, and rises with the mist that rolls from the rivers. The herds draw together, mammoths, bison, horses, bodies pressed for warmth, ears flicking at every sound. Because in this age, darkness belongs to the hunters. You can feel them before you see them. A low tremor in the ground, the faintest shift in the wind, the smell of fur and hunger carried on the cold. There, in the pale half-light, something moves. A shadow glides along the edge of a ridge. A pause. A breath. Then silence again, so deep it feels alive. The saber-toothed cat appears first, broad-shouldered, muscles rippling beneath a coat the color of fading gold. Its fangs, long, curved, glinting with frost, catch the last ember of light before the sun disappears completely. It does not hurry. It waits, patient as ice itself. It has no need for speed. The world will come to it. Then from the distance, another sound, the faint crack of snow beneath heavy paws. Cave lions. Not one, but many. They move together like ghosts stitched from moonlight, silent but certain. Each step measured, each tail flick a signal. Their eyes burn with reflection, twin embers watching from the dark. And lower still, weaving through the shadows, comes the dire wolf. Larger than any wolf you've known. Its breath steams in the air, its fur catches snowflakes like ash. They move in packs, never truly seen, only felt. Their howls rise together, a sound that pierces bone, a song of hunger that rolls across the plains for miles. This was the other half of the Ice Age. If the mammoths and bison were the heartbeat, these predators were the pulse, sharp, relentless, and eternal. They kept the balance, they thinned the weak, they turned death into renewal. And in their wake, the steppe thrived. To see a hunt in that time was to witness nature's cold arithmetic. A small herd of horses senses movement in the wind. One falters, a limp, a stumble. And in that moment, the law of the plains is written again. The wolves break formation, the lions fan out, the cat crouches low, muscles coiled like drawn bowstrings. No cry, no warning. Then, chaos. Snow flies, hooves thunder. The air fills with sound, the heavy drum of pursuit, the roar of a predator's strike, the hiss of breath and frost, and then, silence again. The cycle completed. The world for a heartbeat still. Yet, even here, among the hunters and hunted, humans walked. They were not the strongest, not the fastest, but they watched. They learned. From the wolves, they learned patience. From the lions, they learned cooperation. From the saber-tooth, they learned the power of precision, the art of waiting for the right moment. At night, in their small camps, the wind carried the sounds of distant kills. The fire crackled softly, its glow trembling against the walls of bone and hide. Outside, the night belonged to the beasts. Inside, the firelight belonged to them. They knew that to step beyond its circle was to gamble with death. The line between predator and prey was thin as a breath of warm air. But something stirred within them, something the other hunters did not have. It was not strength, nor claws, nor fangs. It was the spark of thought, the ability to imagine what could happen before it did, to plan, to dream, and in that dream, humankind began to change the rules. Still, in those early nights, fear was constant. The wind howled like wolves, the shadows moved like lions, the eyes of the fire flickered like the gleam of fangs in the dark. Every sound carried a question. Are they hunting us, or are we hunting them? The answer was never simple. Sometimes the hunters became the hunted, sometimes the scavenger became the killer, and sometimes the fires of humankind burned beside the half-eaten carcasses of beasts they had stolen from predators greater than themselves. Survival was never a matter of strength. It was a test of nerve, of will, of patience. Even among the predators, there were hierarchies. The saber-tooth ruled with silence, the lions ruled with numbers, the wolves ruled with endurance. But above them all, something new was rising. A creature that killed, not with tooth or claw, but with mind. A creature that could look into the dark and imagine what might be waiting there, and then prepare for it. That creature was us. And though we were small, fragile, and fearful, the Ice Age had begun to forge us into something else. Something that could outlast even the giants. Still, the night belonged to the predators. The fires burned low, the wind sighed through the grass, and far away, the snow reflected the pale shimmer of moonlight off a predator's eyes. Its breath steamed, its muscles tensed. Somewhere, another life ended. And somewhere else, the cycle began anew. The world of the Ice Age was not a war between light and dark. It was a conversation between hunger and mercy, between endurance and surrender. Every creature played its part. Every shadow had purpose. Even fear had meaning. And as the long winter pressed on, humankind learned to listen to that rhythm. We learned to hear the language of the cold, the whisper of snow underfoot, the sigh of the wind before a storm, the silence that falls when something unseen is watching. We learned to read the world, and with each lesson, each hunt, each narrow escape, the fire of intelligence grew brighter. By the end of that age, humans no longer crouched in fear of the predators. They began to think like them. They learned the art of pursuit, the patience of the wolf, the coordination of the lion, the precision of the saber-tooth, and slowly, quietly, the balance began to shift. The night was still long, the cold unrelenting, but within the circle of firelight, something extraordinary was taking shape. A mind that could imagine tomorrow. A spirit that could endure beyond fear. The predators ruled the dark, but humans were learning to rule time. And soon, the same creatures who once hid from the shadows would step into them willingly, carrying spears, fire, and the first sparks of destiny. The hunter had begun to awaken, and nothing in the frozen world would ever be the same again. The night is long, but the fire still burns. Its glow trembles against walls of mammoth bone and hide, a small circle of warmth in an ocean of cold. Outside, the wind moans through the steppe, a sound older than memory. Inside, people huddle close, faces shadowed, eyes bright with reflection. Here, in the flicker of flame and the whisper of breath, humanity begins to speak. They do not speak in words, not yet, not in the way we know them. They speak in gesture, in glance, in the rhythm of hands carving bone, shaping stone, the crack of flint, the hiss of sparks. The murmur of a child pressed close to its mother as the storm rages beyond the shelter. This is the first true language of survival. The ice has become their teacher. From the cold, they have learned patience. From the beasts, endurance. From the darkness, imagination. Each lesson is carved into the way they live. They build their homes low against the wind, domes made from the ribs of mammoths, stitched together with hide and sinew. Over the entrances, they hang heavy skins to trap the heat inside. And at the center, always, there is fire. The fire never sleeps. Even when the people do, one among them stays awake, feeding the embers, keeping the light alive against the long night. The flicker of that flame paints their faces in gold and shadow. It glows on tools laid out beside them, knives of flint, scrapers of bone, spearheads bound with sinew. Each piece is a masterpiece of necessity. A tool, yes, but also a message. We have learned to shape the world. When dawn comes, pale and slow, they step into the frozen light. The horizon is empty, but they know it is not still. Herds are moving, far beyond sight. The air itself carries their presence, a faint tremor of sound and scent. The hunters gather, they speak few words, yet all understand. A tilt of the head, a flick of a hand, a sharp breath, enough to weave a plan between them. Their weapons are simple, but their minds are sharp. A spear tipped with flint, a net woven from sinew, a stone weighted for the perfect throw. They move together like a single creature, silent, coordinated, reading the land like text. Every shadow, every broken branch, every print in the snow tells a story. And when the moment comes, they strike. A roar fills the air. The trumpeting of a mammoth, the thunder of hooves, the crash of ice as the herd turns to flee. The hunters move as one. Their shouts echo against the cliffs, rising like song. Spears fly, snow erupts. For a heartbeat, the world is chaos, and then silence. When it is over, they stand around the fallen giant. Steam rises from its body, turning to mist in the frozen air. There is no triumph, only gratitude. They touch the mammoth's side, whispering something, perhaps a prayer, perhaps a promise. Because even then, long before temples or gods, they understood. Survival demanded respect. Every life taken carried weight. From the body of the beast, everything is used. The meat feeds them. The bones become homes. The sinew becomes thread. The tusks, carved and polished, become both tools and art. Nothing is wasted, nothing forgotten. And as night falls again, they return to the warmth of their shelter. The fire greets them with its soft crackle, the smell of smoke sweet and ancient. Around it, they share food, tell stories, mend tools. Children play beside their mothers, tracing lines in the dirt that mimic the shapes of animals they've seen, the first sketches of memory. In the far corner, someone hums, a tune with no words, only rhythm. The sound rises and falls with the flame, as if the earth itself is listening. They are beginning to dream. In dreams, they see the herds returning, the rivers thawing, the sky changing. They see ancestors and spirits in the shapes of clouds and smoke. The boundary between the living and the unseen begins to blur. Out of fear and wonder, the first sense of story is born. Because to live in the Ice Age is not only to survive, it is to remember. Each hunt, each winter, each spark of fire carries meaning. They begin to mark these meanings, scratches on bone, spirals on ivory, the faint outlines of animals drawn in ochre and charcoal. At first, perhaps it is only decoration, but soon it becomes more, a record, a way to hold time still. Their hands, rough from cold, move with purpose. They carve the shapes of mammoths, bison, and wolves. They paint with fingers, with feathers, with breath. The cave walls become their sky, and the flickering firelight brings the images to life. The animals seem to move, to breathe, to run across stone. In this sacred silence, something new awakens. Humanity is no longer just surviving. It is creating. Outside, the cold presses close. The wind sighs through the cracks, carrying the distant cry of wolves. But inside, in that warm, trembling glow, The people of the ice have done something extraordinary. They have turned fear into story, necessity into art, instinct into thought. They no longer live against the cold, but with it. The ice is their teacher, the fire their heart, and each breath they take, each song they hum, each mark they carve upon the walls, is a declaration. We are here. The Ice Age has not broken them, it has made them, forged by the wind, tempered by the dark, illuminated by fire. The same hands that once trembled in fear of predators now shape the tools that will define their future. And as the smoke from their fire curls upward, vanishing into the night, it mingles with the breath of the cold, carrying with it the faint, invisible beginning of what we now call humanity. The hunters of the ice are no longer just witnesses to the world. They are its storytellers, its dreamers, its memory. Outside, the wind roams endlessly, but in the shelter of bone and hide, the fire hums, steady and eternal. And in that glow, fragile, flickering, but unbroken, something miraculous endures. The spark that will one day light every city. The warmth that will outlast every winter. The proof that even in the heart of the Ice Age, the human spirit burns bright. Outside the shelter, the wind howls, a long, hollow sound that seems to come from the bones of the earth itself. But inside, it is quiet. The fire has burned low, reduced to a nest of red embers breathing faint light. The people sit close, wrapped in fur, their faces glimmering in the dim glow. They are warm and they are alive. And tonight they will make something that has never existed before. A woman kneels near the wall. In her hand, a shard of stone rubbed with ochre, red as blood, fine as dust. Beside her, a child watches, eyes wide, breath shallow. She reaches out and presses her palm against the rock, steady, deliberate, then lifts it away. A mark remains, her handprint, her proof. For the first time, a human being has said to the world, I was here. The cave wall drinks the light of the fire and gives it back in motion. Every flicker turns the red hand into something alive, pulsing, shifting, moving. Around it, the woman begins to draw lines, tracing the shapes of mammoths, bison, horses, the same creatures that thunder across the plains outside. Each stroke is precise, remembered from hunts, from dreams, from generations of watching. And as she draws, the others watch in silence. No one speaks. They don't have to. They can feel it, that strange, electric understanding that they are witnessing something more than image, something sacred. The world outside is ruled by cold and hunger, but here, in the heart of the earth, something else takes shape. Art, memory, the first language of the soul. When the drawings are finished, they sit together, staring. The firelight dances across the animal's flanks, and suddenly, the figures seem to move. The bison bows its head. The mammoth lumbers forward. The horse turns. The cave itself becomes alive, a theater of stone and flame. And perhaps for the first time, they feel not just fear of the world, but wonder at it. Later, when the embers fade and the smoke drifts upward, someone hums, a soft sound, almost accidental. Another joins in. Then another. A low, rising rhythm, like breath-made music. No words, no melody as we know it, just sound, raw and human, a heartbeat echoing through the cave. The sound grows, circles the fire, fills the dark, and as it fades, silence settles again, but not the same silence as before. This one feels deeper, richer, alive. They have begun to create meaning. They do not yet name it that way, of course, but their instincts know. In the ice and the wind, they have learned the value of cooperation, of planning, of sharing warmth. Now in this new language of art and sound, they learn something else, memory. Art becomes a way to remember what cannot be spoken, a way to pass time forward, hand to hand, breath to breath. It is how they tell their children what the world was and what it might be again. The shape of a mammoth on the wall says, we hunted this. The red handprint says, we lived here. The song says, we are together. In a sense, the caves are the first libraries, not of paper or words, but of presence. Every mark on the wall is a page in the diary of the ice. Each painting is a bridge between the living and those yet to come. Even the ashes in the fire pit are notes in a long, slow melody, a song of survival. The tools change too. The hunters begin to sharpen flint with purpose, shaping long, slender blades. They learn to attach them to shafts of bone, turning them into spears that can strike farther, faster. They pierce holes into hides with bone awls and stitch them shut with sinew, inventing clothes so finely tailored that even the wind cannot find its way in. They carve beads from ivory and string them around the neck, decoration perhaps, but also identity, a sign of belonging, of being seen. And somewhere, deep in another cave, a man carves the shape of a woman. Not a goddess, not yet, but a symbol. Her body full, her features abstract, her presence both human and more than human. We call her the Venus figurine now, but to them she was something simpler and greater. The embodiment of life in a world of death, a promise of fertility, warmth, and continuity. A memory shaped into form. When he finishes, he holds it up to the fire. The light slides over the curves of the small figure, and for a heartbeat it glows, alive in his hand. He passes it to another and another. They touch it gently, reverently. No one knows what it truly means, but everyone feels that it matters. Outside, winter deepens. The herds move south. The wind sharpens. The nights grow longer. But within these small circles of light, the people of the Ice Age now carry something the cold cannot touch: imagination. They no longer only react to the world, they reflect it. They no longer just endure, they interpret. Every tool, every song, every painting is a quiet act of rebellion against oblivion. And though they cannot yet know it, these gestures will ripple outward through time. From these fires will come the first myths. From these carvings, the first symbols. From these shared silences, the first language. The ice has tested them, refined them, carved them, and now it begins to mirror them. The land, outside, once raw and indifferent, becomes a reflection of their thoughts. They name rivers, they follow stars, they shape stone. They dream of tomorrow. Imagine one of those nights. The snow has fallen heavy. The wind outside wails against the cave mouth like a wounded animal. Inside, the hunters sit in a circle. An elder speaks, not with sentences, but with gestures and sounds that together tell a story. His hands move through the air, tracing the path of a hunt, the rise of the moon, the fall of a great beast. The fire crackles in rhythm with his voice. Children stare wide-eyed. The youngest laughs, startled, when the storyteller mimics the roar of a lion. The adults smile, the elder grins, and for a moment, the cold disappears. The story has made them warm. That warmth is more than physical. It is connection, a thread stretched between people, across time. They have discovered something that will outlast them all: the power to remember together. In the days that follow, they return to the hunt. Their movements are precise, almost ritual. They know where the herds will pass, which rivers will freeze last, where the winds shift before a storm. Their understanding of the world grows sharper, not through books, but through observation. Their knowledge is written in the ground, the stars, the rhythm of breath. They begin to plan ahead, storing meat, shaping tools for future seasons, marking places on the land that hold meaning. In this way, the Ice Age becomes a forge not only of survival, but of intellect. The mind of humanity is awakening. They have begun to see patterns. In the herds, in the skies, in the seasons. They recognize cycles. They remember when the rivers thaw and freeze. They learn to predict the world, and in doing so, they begin to control it. And somewhere, deep in a hidden cave, another spark ignites. Curiosity about the why. Why does the sun return after the longest night? Why do the herds move as they do? Why does fire burn and wind howl and ice crack? The first questions form, quiet, fragile, but unstoppable. From these questions will come faith, and from faith, story. From story, understanding, and from understanding, civilization. But none of that exists yet. For now, there's only this: a fire, a wall of painted stone, and a small group of people pressing close against the dark. They do not know it, but they have become something new. Creatures who live not just in the world, but through it. Their minds are full of images, their hearts full of song. They are still children of the ice, but they are already dreaming of the future. Above the cave, the aurora dances, green and violet ribbons moving across the sky. The people inside do not know the science behind it, but they look up and they feel something vast and alive. The same force that shapes the wind and the snow seems to shape them too. And when they sleep, they dream not of hunger or fear, but of color, motion, and memory. They dream of the bison that ran, of the mammoth that fell, of the fire that burned. They dream of a world that speaks, and for the first time they understand that they are part of its voice. The ice still rules the land, but within that cold, a quiet revolution has begun. The first spark of art has kindled the first ember of thought, and from that ember a new light will grow, one that no storm, no winter, no darkness will ever fully extinguish. It is the light of meaning, the light of story, the first glimmer of the human soul. The fires still burned in the caves, but outside, the world itself was shifting again. The air had begun to move differently. The snow that once fell endlessly now melted a little sooner each spring. Rivers ran stronger, the summers lingered longer, and far to the north, the walls of ice, those white fortresses that had stood for ages, began to stir. The people of the plains didn't know it, but they were living through one of the most extraordinary transformations the planet had ever seen. The earth was changing its rhythm. If the Ice Age had a heartbeat, this was it. The glaciers advanced and retreated not by chance, but by design, a slow, predictable pattern written in the heavens themselves. It was a system older than language, older than life, the deep, cosmic machinery of the Milankovitch cycles. High above the earth, the sun burned with its eternal fire, steady and indifferent. But the planet's dance around it was anything but constant. Over tens of thousands of years, the Earth's orbit stretched and relaxed, like a slow inhale and exhale. Sometimes the orbit was almost circular, keeping the world evenly warmed. At other times it elongated, pushing the Earth farther from the sun at its most distant point, and closer at its nearest. This alone could shift the balance between ages of ice and ages of green. Then there was the tilt, the lean of our planet on its axis. It wobbled, like a spinning top losing speed, swaying back and forth by a few degrees every 40,000 years or so. When the tilt grew steeper, the summers at the poles became fierce and bright, melting snow and sending rivers rushing toward the sea. When the tilt lessened, the summers weakened. The snows of winter lingered, and in that lingering, ice began to grow again, layer upon layer, year after year, a breath drawn in and held. And still there was the precession, the slow twist of Earth's axis as it turns like a great gyroscope in space. Every 26,000 years, the planet's orientation shifted, changing the timing of the seasons relative to its orbit. It was subtle, invisible, but its consequences were vast. Each movement of the planet's body, orbit, tilt, wobble, altered the amount of sunlight that reached the northern hemisphere, where the great ice sheets waited to be born. These three rhythms, orbit, tilt, and precession, wove together like notes in a long, slow song. A song the Earth had been singing for millions of years. But there was another layer, a quieter, more intricate rhythm hidden beneath. The Earth was not a machine of stone and orbit alone. It was a living system, air, ocean, land, and life entwined in endless feedback. When the glaciers grew, they reflected sunlight back into space, cooling the planet further. When they melted, the dark ground beneath absorbed heat, warming the air and quickening the thaw. The oceans joined the dance, drawing in carbon dioxide when the world cooled, releasing it when it warmed. Like lungs breathing alongside the sky, it was a feedback loop, a conversation between ice and air, water and fire. When one moved, all others answered. It was as if the Earth itself were alive, not in the way a creature is alive, but in the way a heartbeat is. A pulse of energy that keeps everything in motion. Volcanoes, too, played their part. They were the lungs of the deep earth, exhaling ash and gas into the atmosphere. A single massive eruption could dim the sunlight for years, tipping the balance toward cold once more. In this way, the planet seemed to breathe in cycles both vast and sudden, millennia-long sighs punctuated by moments of eruption and storm. Imagine it. You are standing on a plain beneath a sky of shifting silver. The wind is sharp, the ground trembles faintly beneath your boots, not from any quake, but from the subtle expansion of thawing permafrost. The rivers have swollen, their surfaces gleam with thin mirrors of ice breaking apart. From the horizon, you hear the distant groan of glaciers. That ancient sound of ice fracturing, cracking, collapsing under the burden of its own age. The world is exhaling. And yet, it is not chaos. It is rhythm. Measured, patient, ancient. The same cycles that once pulled the Earth into the deep freeze are now pulling it out again. The same invisible clockwork that froze the continents is beginning to melt them free. Even the stars themselves have shaped this moment. Their distant gravity tugs gently on the Earth's path. The pull of Jupiter and Saturn, the tilt of the Moon's orbit, all weave together into this grand choreography of cold and warmth. We think of climate as a thing that changes, but truly, it moves, it breathes, it dances. For those who lived through it, the change was slow, so slow that no one could name it. They simply noticed that winters seemed less endless, that the rivers thawed earlier each year, that the air carried more moisture, more life. Grass grew taller, forests crept northward, and the animals followed, step by step, generation by generation, into lands newly freed from the weight of ice. To them, it was not a global transformation. It was just the world, being the world, shifting quietly beneath their feet. But in truth, the Earth was turning a page in its long history. The age of ice had reached its peak, and the slow tide of warmth had begun. Scientists today can read this ancient rhythm in the ice itself. Deep in Greenland and Antarctica, they drill through layers of frozen time, cylinders of ice that hold tiny bubbles of air, sealed away for hundreds of thousands of years. Each bubble is a whisper from the past, a snapshot of the atmosphere as it once was. Through these fragile archives, we can trace the planet's breath, the rise and fall of carbon dioxide, the dance of temperature and dust, the heartbeat of glaciation and thaw. Each layer, thin as a strand of hair, is a year. Thousands of layers together form a record of the Earth's slow music. Cold rising, warmth falling, cold rising again. It is humbling to see it written there, so clearly, so patiently. The Earth, it seems, keeps its own journals. And through those journals we see how fragile balance truly is. A small change in sunlight, a shift of less than 1%, can turn oceans into prisons of ice or fields of flowers. A few hundred parts of carbon in the air can decide whether the world freezes or burns. This, too, is part of the lesson the Ice Age leaves behind, that power and vulnerability are two sides of the same breath. For humans who were still new to this ancient rhythm, such knowledge was not yet written in words, but they felt it in their bones. They moved with the seasons. They built when the rivers thawed and fled when the frost returned. They learned to read the signs, the tilt of light, the smell of wind, the silence before the storm. Without knowing it, they had become students of the sky. And their lives, their migrations, their myths, all would soon be shaped by the slow machinery of the heavens. It is strange to think of the Earth as an engine. Engines are human things, made of metal and fire. But this one is made of orbit and gravity, of air and ice, of feedback and flame. It does not roar. It hums, softly, endlessly, beneath everything we know. And when it changes pace, the entire planet shifts with it. Mountains rise, oceans fall, species vanish and are born again. Civilizations bloom and fade. This is the true scale of time, not measured in generations or empires, but in breaths of the world. Outside the ancient caves, the aurora swirls again. Ribbons of green and violet trembling across the black sky. The same sky our ancestors once watched, not knowing that its beauty was also a warning. That everything, the cold, the warmth, the wind, the rain, is part of a single, living rhythm. The Ice Age was not an ending or a beginning. It was a breath, drawn in and slowly released. And as the ice melted, as the rivers broke free, as the stars kept time in their eternal silence, humanity, standing small but awake, began to follow that rhythm, not as prey or wanderers anymore, but as witnesses to the heartbeat of the Earth itself. The warmth had returned, slowly at first, like breath on cold glass. The ice began to sigh. What was once still for millennia now creaked, cracked, and moaned beneath its own ancient weight. Beneath those frozen continents, rivers of meltwater formed, unseen, silent, patient. They gathered in hidden basins, pressing against walls of ice as high as mountains, waiting for the moment when the world would loosen its grip. And then, the waiting ended. Ixker. It began with a sound, a deep, resonant crack, like the breaking of the sky itself. Then came the roar, water, millions of tons of it, bursting free. What followed was not a flood as we know it, but a cataclysm. Beneath the great Laurentide ice sheet of North America lay a lake so vast it could have swallowed nations, Glacial Lake Agassiz. For centuries, it had waited, trapped behind a wall of ice. When that wall broke, the flood that followed was beyond imagination. It swept across the land with the strength of oceans, carving new valleys, ripping away forests, reshaping the very bones of the earth. Rivers were born in days, canyons were carved in hours, the waters thundered toward the sea, carrying with them the memory of ice. The Columbia River Gorge in what is now the Pacific Northwest was one of these creations. Its cliffs, its scars, its haunting beauty, all remnants of those ancient floods. Each time the ice dam reformed and broke again, the land was remade, the signature of a planet in transition. Across Europe, the story was the same. The Fennoscandian ice sheet, retreating northward, held back immense lakes that stretched for hundreds of miles. When their icy boundaries gave way, torrents of meltwater tore across the continent, cutting new paths for rivers like the Thames, the Rhine, and the Danube. The map of Europe was redrawn again and again, as if the earth were sketching and erasing its own outlines with every breath of thaw. Even in Siberia, immense basins of meltwater formed and broke. Floods that drowned valleys, swept away herds, and shifted the course of history in silence. The ice did not simply melt. It moved, it spoke, it remembered. Imagine standing on one of those plains as it happened. The ground trembles first, a sound like thunder rising from below. The air tastes strange, metallic, charged with motion. Then on the horizon a dark line appears, spreading wider, taller, faster. It is not a storm, not a cloud, but water. A wall of it, rushing forward with the force of a god unbound. Trees vanish, stones lift and roll like pebbles. The world becomes sound and movement, chaos and creation all at once. And when it is over, when the roaring has faded, what remains is not destruction, but transformation. New lakes glimmer in the morning light, filling the hollows where the glaciers once slept. Fresh soil, rich with minerals ground fine by ice, lies across the plains, the first promise of fertility in a world that has known only cold. Life begins to return, timidly at first, but irresistibly. Grass, moss, a bird's call echoing over still water. The earth, scarred and shining, breathes again. These floods were more than events. They were turning points. Each one marked a shift in the planet's balance, a moment when the world took another step out of the long night of ice. And though no human living then could have understood the science behind them, they would have felt the power of it. The trembling of the ground, the disappearance of valleys, the sudden birth of new lakes and rivers. For those early peoples, water was not a thing, it was a spirit, a force of creation and destruction. When it moved, so did they. Hunting grounds were erased overnight, paths vanished beneath the sea. But in the wake of the floods came renewal, new fish, new soil, new life. So they followed the water as they had followed the herds, because the earth to them was alive, and when it changed, they changed with it. Not all floods were violent. Some were quiet, slow, graceful. As the ice receded, lakes formed in the deep scars it left behind, blue mirrors reflecting a new sky. The Great Lakes of North America were among these, carved by the patient weight of glaciers, filled by their parting tears. Their waters were cold, pure, still, a gift from the age that had nearly ended life, now giving it back in abundance. Over time, these lakes became havens, feeding rivers, nurturing forests, drawing animals and humans alike. They were memories of ice made gentle, proof that even destruction can give birth to beauty. But there were others, ghosts of lakes that did not last. Some evaporated, some drained away when the ice that held them finally vanished. Their dry beds remained like scars, quiet reminders of how fleeting even the grandest creations of nature can be. The power of these floods was not limited to land alone. When enough ice melted, sea levels rose, first slowly, then with terrifying speed. Entire coastlines shifted. The land bridges that had once connected continents, Beringia, Sunda, Doggerland, began to drown beneath the returning tide. Where herds had once crossed and people had walked, the ocean now rolled. The familiar world of the Ice Age vanished beneath the waves. For humans, this was both loss and revelation. They stood on cliffs and watched as the sea crept closer, claiming the plains their ancestors had walked. Perhaps they did not understand why, but they could not ignore the truth. The earth was changing faster than memory could keep up. The gods of ice and stone had given way to gods of water and wind. Yet, in that loss, there was also beginning. The rivers that now carved through the land became highways for migration. The fertile plains left by the floods became fields for the first plants. The lakes became mirrors of the sky, places of reflection, of birth, of story. Each flood was a page in a longer story, the story of a planet becoming itself again. And like every story, it carried a lesson. Change, no matter how violent, creates possibility. Destruction is only the prelude to renewal. The glaciers carved, the waters rewrote, and in their wake, the world was made new. Picture it one last time. The last of the ice, gleaming under a pale sun, sighs as it melts. Water runs down its face like tears, not of grief, but of release. The rivers below swell and shimmer, finding new paths, shaping new futures. The air smells of wet stone and soil, the scent of beginning. Somewhere, a human stands watching, hair lifted by the wind, eyes full of light reflected from a world reborn. Behind them lies the age of ice, vast, cold, eternal. Before them stretches the age of water, restless, flowing, alive. The glaciers had ruled for 100,000 years, but their reign was over. The earth had begun to remember its warmth, and as the floods receded, they left behind more than lakes and valleys. They left the foundations of everything that would come next. The rivers we still follow, the fertile plains we still plant, the memory of how even the mightiest forces yield to time. The ice had spoken in silence, now the waters roared in reply. And the world, cleansed, carved, and shimmering, was ready for the next verse in its endless song. The floods had come and gone, and in their wake, the earth was changed. Where once the land was white and bare, now the color green began to return. Timidly at first, then with a steady, unstoppable rhythm. The world, long frozen under silence, was beginning to speak again in the language of leaves. The glaciers, once towers of cold light, had retreated toward the poles, leaving behind plains of rich soil and river valleys still glistening with melt. The air grew softer. The wind no longer cut the skin but carried the scent of growth, damp earth, grass, pollen. It was as if the planet had exhaled after holding its breath for 100,000 years. Across Europe, Asia, and the Americas, the first forests crept northward. At the edges of the receding ice, seeds that had slept for millennia awoke. Pine came first, hardy, solemn, green even in the half-light. Then birch and willow, their slender branches dancing where ice once ruled. Later, oak and elm, spreading their canopies wide, shading ground that had not known shadow in 10,000 years. The mammoth steppe, that endless, wind-scoured sea of grass, began to shrink. Its wide horizons softened under the slow advance of trees. The plains that once echoed with the thunder of hooves grew quieter, their sounds absorbed by the whisper of leaves. To the north, tundra still clung to life, but everywhere else the world was turning from silver to green. It was beautiful. But beauty, in nature, is rarely gentle. For the giants who had ruled the age of ice, the change was fatal. Their kingdom had depended on open land and cold winds, on grasses tough enough to survive frost and dry air. Now those lands were vanishing. The mammoths that had once marched across the plains found themselves hemmed in by forests too dense for their bulk. Their tusks caught in the branches. Their food disappeared beneath the canopy. They followed the shrinking steppes farther north, retreating, always retreating, until there was nowhere left to go. The woolly rhinoceroses fared no better. They were creatures of wind and snow, built to sweep aside the frozen drifts. In the warm, wet world that followed, their heavy coats became burdens. The air was thick, the insects merciless, the grass unfamiliar. One by one, the herds dwindled, leaving behind only bones buried in mud and peat. The cave lions, the dire wolves, the saber-toothed cats, they too began to vanish. Their prey was gone, their plains overtaken by forest, their strength wasted in a changing world. Even the mighty ground sloths of the Americas, gentle and slow, fell silent beneath the heat of a new sun. The Ice Age giants did not die in a single moment of catastrophe. They faded, slowly, quietly, like the melting glaciers themselves. Every year a little less grass, every spring a little more forest. And in that gradual shift, their time ended. Quersmarm quim. But climate alone was not their only adversary. By now, another force had spread across the continents. A new predator, smaller than a lion, weaker than a wolf, but armed with something no creature had possessed before: the power of mind. Humans had grown in number, skill, and courage. They had learned to hunt not just for survival, but with purpose, to plan, to trap, to coordinate. They followed the herds that remained, moving across the continents with quiet precision. Wherever the giants fled, humans arrived soon after. At first, it was balance, necessity, not dominance. A single mammoth could feed an entire tribe, provide shelter, tools, warmth. But as the ice withdrew and the lands grew crowded, the hunts became more frequent, more efficient. Stone-tipped spears, fire drives, and ambushes near rivers, tactics born from intelligence and desperation. Some scientists now argue that humanity was the final winter of the megafauna. Others say the warming world would have claimed them regardless. The truth is likely both. The Earth was already changing, but humans hastened the end. The giants had faced countless seasons of cold, famine, and flood, but they had never faced us. Imagine a plain in what is now Siberia. It is spring. The brief, golden season between freeze and thaw. The snow is retreating, the rivers surge with meltwater. A small herd of mammoths trudges through the fog, their fur matted with damp. One stops, ears twitching. The air is strange. There is no wind, no sound, only stillness. Then, a cry, a flash, the whistle of spears through air. The hunt begins. The mammoth trumpets, a deep, echoing bellow that shakes the ground, but it cannot outrun the hunters. They surround it, moving in coordination, their voices rising to mask the fear in their chests. Another spear flies, another. The beast falters. And in that moment, in that breath between life and death, the Ice Age closes another chapter. When the creature finally falls, the hunters approach in silence. They touch its side, still warm, and bow their heads. It is not triumph, it is reverence. They know this world is slipping away, even if they cannot yet name why. Perhaps, in their way, they mourn it. By 10,000 years ago, most of the great Ice Age giants were gone. The mammoths vanished from Europe and North America. The saber-toothed cats disappeared from the plains they once ruled. The woolly rhinoceros, the ground sloth, the mastodon, all gone. Only a few survivors lingered in hidden corners of the world. On a lonely Arctic island called Wrangel, a small population of dwarf mammoths clung to existence for another 4,000 years, living ghosts of a vanished age. When they too fell silent, the age of giants was truly over. The forests had taken their place. Deer replaced mammoths, wolves replaced saber-tooths, and humanity, that fragile, fire-bearing species, had begun to fill the empty spaces left behind. The world that emerged was softer, greener, quieter. The air was thick with life. Insects, birds, blossoms, the chorus of a planet reborn. But beneath that new abundance lay a memory of loss. The soil that fed the new forests was born from the bones of what came before. The rivers that wound through the trees still flowed through valleys carved by glaciers. Even the wind carried the faint echo of the steppe, a whisper of the mammoth herds that once shook the earth. For humans, this changing world brought opportunity. They no longer needed to wander endlessly in search of herds. The rivers, now rich with fish, the forests full of fruit and game, the climate gentle enough for seeds to take root. Slowly they began to stay, to build, to plant, to dream of permanence. And in that dream, the foundations of future civilizations were born. But even as they adapted to this new abundance, the memory of the cold remained within them. They carried it in their stories. Tales of floods and fire, of beasts so large the ground shook when they walked. They carved it into stone, painted it on cave walls, whispered it across generations. Because somewhere deep within, they knew that the world, warm or cold, fertile or barren, was always capable of change, and that they, too, were children of that change. The Ice Age did not end in a single moment. It dissolved, like breath in the morning air. Its spirit lingered in the rivers, in the soil, in the hearts of the people who had endured it. Every leaf that now fluttered in the sun was born from the same world that once lay under miles of ice. Even the silence of the forests carried the memory of thunder. The rumble of mammoth herds, the cry of the saber-tooth, the song of the wind over the steppe. And as the last glaciers melted into the sea, and the first trees cast shadows where once there had been only light, the earth began a new chapter. One written not by giants or ice, but by humankind. The cold had shaped their bodies, the hunt had shaped their minds. But it was this, the ending of an age, the fall of giants, the return of green, that would shape their destiny. Because now, for the first time in history, they stood on a world remade, fertile, forgiving, alive, and they were free to imagine what came next. The ice was gone, but its shadow remained. Even after the last glacier melted into the sea, the world still carried the marks of its touch, deep scars and quiet gifts scattered across the face of the earth. The Ice Age had ended, yes, but it had not disappeared. It lived on in the valleys, in the rivers, in the shape of every coastline and mountain still glistening under the sun. Walk across the northern lands today, through the forests of Canada, the hills of Scandinavia, the plains of northern Europe, and you are walking through the ruins of that frozen empire. The hills are not just hills, they are moraines, piled high with the rubble left behind as the glaciers retreated. The lakes that dot the land, mirror-like and countless, are the footprints of melting ice, each one a memory of water once locked in crystal silence. The rivers, too, still follow the paths carved by glacial floods. Even the fertile soil beneath our feet, that rich, dark earth that feeds our fields and forests, is the dust of mountains ground down by ancient ice. The Great Lakes of North America, vast and shimmering, are among the grandest relics of this vanished age. They were carved not by rivers, but by walls of ice 2 miles thick. Rivers of frozen stone that once scraped the continent clean. When the ice finally melted, it filled those scars with life, turning wounds into mirrors. To stand on their shores today is to stand at the edge of time itself, to look into the reflection of a world that once lay buried in snow. Even the land beneath the seas remembers. Where Britain now stands apart from Europe, there was once Doggerland, a great plain of rivers and grass where mammoths grazed and humans hunted. When the sea rose, it swallowed that country whole, leaving only whispers of it beneath the waves. Divers still find fragments there, antlers, bones, flint tools, the ghosts of a world drowned by the slow return of warmth. It is strange, isn't it? How land can vanish yet remain in memory. How the ocean itself can become an archive of what was. Across the world, the earth still breathes the rhythm of its frozen past. In Scandinavia and Canada, the ground is still rising, rebounding from the weight of the glaciers that once pressed it down. Each year, the land lifts by mere millimeters, as if exhaling after 10,000 years of holding its breath. The continents themselves are still adjusting to the memory of ice. But the legacy of the Ice Age is not written only in stone and soil. It is written in life. The animals that survived, reindeer, muskoxen, Arctic foxes, still carry the resilience of that time. Their coats change with the seasons. Their blood flows with warmth even in the deepest cold. They are living echoes of the mammoths and wolves that once ruled the tundra. Even we, humans, are shaped by that age. Our migrations, our stories, our very bodies bear its imprint. The paths our ancestors walked, across the frozen bridge of Beringia, through the tundras of Europe, over the plains of North America, became the first threads of the web that would one day cover the globe. The skills we learned, fire, shelter, cooperation, were not inventions of comfort, they were necessities of survival. The cold forged us, the ice made us human, and though the world has warmed, that inheritance remains. In our bones there is endurance, in our minds, adaptation, in our hearts, a memory of standing beneath vast skies before walls of ice that touch the clouds. We no longer live in that frozen world, yet some part of us still listens for the sound of it. Scientists today can still read the story of that age, not through myth or memory, but through the language of the earth. They drill deep into the glaciers of Greenland and Antarctica, pulling up slender cores of ice that hold time itself. Each layer captures a breath of the ancient atmosphere, a trace of ash from distant volcanoes, a whisper of dust from the mammoth steppes. Under the microscope, the ice tells its story, of warmth and cold, of wind and silence, of a planet that has always been alive in its own slow rhythm. In those frozen cylinders of memory, we see not just the past, but the future. Because the same cycles that once froze the world still move beneath us. The same breath drew the ice across the continents still flows through the oceans and the air. And though the warmth now rises, the rhythm endures. The earth has always known how to change. It has always known how to begin again. But perhaps the most haunting legacy of the Ice Age is not found in science, but in silence. The silence of the tundra, where wind still sings through the bones of forgotten giants. The silence of the mountains, where ancient ice clings in shrinking patches, whispering of ages past. And the silence within us, that quiet knowing that the world has turned and turned again before us and will do so long after we are gone. The Ice Age was never truly about cold. It was about endurance, about the will to live through change so vast that time itself seemed to move differently. It was about learning to listen to the earth, to its breathing, its patience, its infinite capacity for transformation. Stand now, wherever you are. Look at the hills, the rivers, the sea. Every curve of land, every glint of water carries the fingerprints of that frozen time. You are surrounded by the memory of ice, by the world it shaped, by the silence it left behind. Even the air you breathe is a descendant of that age, purified, tempered, softened by the long thaw of history. And if you close your eyes, you might still feel it. The faint hum beneath your feet. The ghost of glaciers moving in slow motion, carving mountains into meaning. The rhythm of the earth itself. The Ice Age never truly ended. It simply changed form, melting into rivers, into forests, into the lives that came after. It became the world we know, the soil that feeds us, the water that sustains us, the stories that remind us who we are. We are not separate from it. We are its continuation. Every breath we take, every step we walk is part of that same long journey from cold to warmth, from silence to song. And perhaps that is the final truth the Ice Age left us. That nothing, no storm, no darkness, no age of ice, is forever. Everything changes. Everything transforms. Even the coldest winter carries within it the seed of spring. The glaciers may have vanished, but their story is written into the world, and into us. And if you listen, truly listen, you can still hear it. A deep, steady breath beneath the noise of modern life, the pulse of time, the echo of ice. The story of the Ice Age is not a tale of extinction, but of becoming. It is the memory of a world remade, where the silence of snow taught life how to endure, and the cold itself sculpted the first sparks of humanity. From glaciers that carved the bones of continents, to the hunters who painted their breath onto cave walls, every fragment of that age still lives within us. We are the children of fire and frost. Every heartbeat, every invention, every dream of ours is the continuation of that long thaw, the moment when life refused to surrender to the cold. The Ice Age did not end, it transformed into rivers, into forests, into us. And the same courage that guided our ancestors through endless winters is the same light that guides us through our own storms today. So when you look at a mountain or feel the chill of wind on your skin, remember, that is the breath of time itself touching you. The earth is still alive, still breathing, still writing its story, and we are part of every line. Because to understand the Ice Age is to understand ourselves, fragile, curious, unyielding, and forever learning to begin again. If you've walked this far into the frozen silence with me, I want to thank you. Maybe you're listening from a warm room or half asleep beneath a blanket while the night hums softly outside. But right now, in this shared quiet, we've crossed 10,000 years together. If this story moved you, leave a sign, a simple trace like the red handprints on the cave walls. Click the heart, leave a comment. Let your voice join this long echo of wonder, because the story of the earth isn't finished, and the next verse is ours to write. Stay curious and keep listening. The ice still whispers. Travel with us through time, across frozen continents, mammoth plains, and melting seas, to rediscover the world that shaped us all. When the ice speaks through us is a poetic conclusion to the journey through the Ice Age, a meditation on survival, change, and the quiet strength that lives within every human heart. If this story touched you, leave a comment, even a single or still listening, and let your voice join this chorus of curiosity that stretches across time. Subscribe for more cinematic stories about the cosmos, history, and the hidden rhythms of our planet. Because the Earth remembers. And somewhere beneath the noise of our lives, the ice still breathes.